Commander Xyloth stared at the navigation chart floating before him in the dim light of his quarters. His three eyes moved across the glowing map that showed every corner of known space, every trade route, every diplomatic zone that connected the 73 species of the Galactic Council. But there was one area that made no sense, a region of roughly 200 star systems marked only with the words human space and surrounded by a thick crimson border. No trade lanes crossed it, no survey data existed for it. It was as if that entire section of the galaxy simply did not exist for anyone except the mysterious species that claimed it. He had been a commander in the Etherian trade fleet for 40 cycles and had never questioned the gap in the charts. No one questioned it. It was simply accepted as fact, like gravity or the speed of light. But now, as he planned a new route through the Outer Rim territories, his curiosity finally overcame his conditioning. He called his navigation officer, a young Vex named Kirill, to his quarters. Kirill entered nervously, his scales shifting to a pale green that indicated discomfort. He knew what the commander wanted to discuss before a word was spoken. When Xyloth asked why no one ever entered human space, Kirill's reaction was immediate and visceral. His scales went almost white with fear. He spoke in a whisper as if saying the words too loudly might summon some terrible fate. It was forbidden by council decree, he said. Not just forbidden, but forbidden on the grounds of survival itself. Xyloth dismissed the young officer's superstition and began his own research. What he found was more disturbing than he expected. There were no detailed records about humans in the council database. No biological assessments, no cultural studies, no trade manifests or diplomatic reports beyond the most basic information. It was as if the entire galaxy had agreed to simply not know anything about their human neighbors. The only substantial document he could access was titled Accord Regarding Human Territorial Sovereignty, passed by the Council 900 cycles ago. The accord was brief and absolute in its terms. All Council species agreed to maintain a minimum distance of 5 light-years from any system claimed by humans. No military vessels were permitted to approach the border under any circumstances. No attempts at communication were to be made without explicit invitation from humanity itself. The penalty for violation was immediate expulsion from the Council and loss of all protection under galactic law. The severity of the punishment seemed wildly disproportionate unless there was something truly terrifying about the humans that justified such extreme caution. Xyloth began asking questions. He spoke to other commanders, to diplomats, to scholars who studied galactic history. Most refused to discuss the topic at all. Those who were willing to speak did so only in private, in places where surveillance was minimal. They shared fragments of stories, whispers of events that happened long before most of them were born. The picture that emerged was incomplete but deeply unsettling. Finally, an elderly Threxian diplomat named Quor agreed to tell him the full story. They met in a dark corner of a station bar, over drinks that made Quar's breathing stalks quiver with each sip. Quor had been young when the accord was signed, but he remembered the events that led to it with perfect clarity. He remembered because what happened to the Krovar Imperium had changed the entire galaxy's understanding of what was possible. The Krovar had been the most powerful military force in known space, Quor explained. They commanded 300 warships, each one capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten glass in a matter of hours. They were conquerors by culture and by choice, having subjugated dozens of species over thousands of cycles. When they looked at the region marked as human space on their charts, they saw unclaimed territory ripe for expansion. They saw resources to exploit and worlds to add to their empire. The fact that some primitive species called themselves humans and claimed those worlds meant nothing to the Krovar might made right in their philosophy, and they had never encountered anyone with might greater than their own. The Krovar sent an expeditionary force to a human colony world called Eden Prime. According to their intelligence, it was a peaceful settlement with no significant military presence. Just civilian transport, some mining operations, and a single science vessel conducting research in the outer system. The Krovar fleet numbered 50 warships for this initial operation. It was considered massive overkill for such a minor target, but the Krovar believed in overwhelming force as a matter of doctrine. The fleet entered the system and immediately broadcast surrender demands on all frequencies. They expected either immediate capitulation or a brief futile resistance followed by capitulation. What they received instead was a simple message in perfect Krovar language: Leave now or learn why our space ends here. The Krovar commander found this amusing. He ordered his fleet to proceed with planetary invasion protocols. 17 minutes later, every Krovar ship in the system went dark, not destroyed, not damaged, simply dark. Their reactors continued to run. Life support remained functional, but every weapon system, every shield generator, every navigation computer stopped responding to commands. The ships became nothing more than metal boxes drifting in space, completely helpless. Then the human spoke again. You have 5 minutes to abandon your vessels. After that, we will not be responsible for what happens. The Krovar were warriors bred for combat across countless generations. Retreat was not in their nature. Surrender to an inferior enemy was unthinkable. Their commander ordered all personnel to remain at their stations and prepare to repel boarders. He assumed the humans would attempt to capture the fleet, and the Krovar would fight hand-to-hand if necessary. When the 5 minutes elapsed, something emerged from the vicinity of Eden Prime. Long-range sensors on Council observation posts at the edge of the system barely detected it. A single ship, no larger than a standard cargo hauler. It moved through the disabled Krovar fleet with impossible speed and precision. Each warship it passed began to collapse inward, crushed by forces that defied every known law of physics. Within 1 hour, all 50 warships had been reduced to perfect spheres of compressed metal, each no larger than an escape pod. 50 massive warships, thousands of meters long, compressed into objects you could carry in your arms. But the truly remarkable thing, Kor said, was what happened to the crews. Every single Krovar soldier, over 12,000 warriors, vanished from the compressed ships in the same instant. They materialized unharmed on the surface of Eden Prime, in an open field where the humans had prepared food, water, and shelter. The humans treated their would-be invaders with courtesy and care. They provided medical attention to those injured in the panic of the attack. They explained calmly that the Krovar had made a mistake and would be sent home with a message for their Imperium. The message was simple. This is the only warning you will receive. The Krovar Imperium's response was predictable. They declared total war on humanity. They assembled the largest fleet ever seen in galactic history, nearly 2,000 warships drawn from every corner of their vast empire. They vowed to wipe humanity from existence as an example to any other species that might dare to resist their expansion. The entire fleet was placed under the command of their most decorated admiral. Every ship was crewed by their finest warriors. They entered human space with enough firepower to sterilize 100 worlds. Not one ship returned. Not one distress call was ever received. The entire fleet simply vanished as if it had never existed. The Krovar Imperium waited for word, for any signal, for some indication of what had happened. They received nothing for 3 weeks. Then a single human vessel appeared in orbit around the Krovar homeworld. It made no aggressive moves. It did not power weapons or deploy troops. It simply broadcast one message on all frequencies before departing. War is over, you lost. Continue your normal lives. The Krovar Imperium collapsed within a single cycle, not from destruction or conquest, but from the sudden realization that their entire military leadership had vanished. Every admiral, every general, every senior commander had been aboard that fleet. The political structure that depended on military might had no foundation without the military to support it. Subject species rebelled. Internal factions turned on each other. The greatest empire in galactic history tore itself apart through sheer psychological shock. The Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from every species gathered to discuss what should be done about the humans. Some argued for a preemptive strike, a combined fleet from all Council species to eliminate the threat before it could turn its attention to the rest of the galaxy. Others argued for immediate diplomatic outreach, hoping to establish peaceful relations before any misunderstanding could lead to conflict. The debate raged for weeks. Then the humans sent a message to the Council. It was polite, almost apologetic in tone. Humanity had no interest in conquest or expansion beyond their current borders. They wished to maintain peaceful relations with all galactic species. They would establish a small embassy station at the edge of their space for any diplomatic communications. But they had one absolute requirement. Do not enter human space without explicit invitation. Respect our borders and we will respect yours. The Council agreed immediately. The accord was drafted, signed, and implemented within days. Every species present understood that they had no choice. Whatever the humans were, whatever technology they possessed, it was beyond anything the galaxy could comprehend or counter. The safest option was to give them the isolation they requested, and hoped they remained as peaceful as they claimed. Kor finished his story and looked at Xyloth with eyes that had seen too much. The commander sat in silence, processing what he had learned. He understood now why the charts ended at human space. It was not because humans enforced the boundary with threats or violence. It was because every species in the galaxy had collectively decided that some mysteries were better left unexplored. Some boundaries existed not because they were maintained by force, but because crossing them was simply unthinkable. Xyloth returned to his ship and filed his new trade route, making sure it gave human space the widest possible berth. But late at night, alone in his quarters, he would sometimes pull up the galactic chart and stare at that crimson border. He would wonder what marvels and terrors existed beyond it. He would imagine what kind of species could make the entire galaxy agree to pretend they did not exist. And, like every other being in the Council, he never dared to find out. The chart ended at human space, and now he understood why. Some questions were too dangerous to ask, and some answers were too terrible to know. Ambassador Lissa had built her entire career on achieving the impossible. She had negotiated peace between species that had fought wars lasting millennia. She had resolved trade disputes that threatened to shatter the Council into fragments. Her 3 terms as chief diplomat had brought unprecedented cooperation across the galaxy. Now she stood before the full Council assembly, preparing to make the proposal that would either define her legacy or destroy her career entirely. She spoke clearly and with confidence, though her hearts beat faster than normal. She formally requested permission to establish direct contact with humanity beyond the embassy station. 900 cycles had passed since the Krovar incident. Perhaps enough time had gone by for the galaxy to finally understand their mysterious neighbors. Perhaps it was time to stop living in fear of the unknown. The reaction was immediate chaos. Representatives from 73 species began shouting at once, their translators struggling to keep pace with the overlapping voices. Some called her mad. Others accused her of risking galactic security for personal glory. A few simply stared at her in shock, unable to comprehend that anyone would seriously suggest such a thing. Chancellor Vorn, a Methusian who had led the Council for over 2 centuries, slammed his resonant staff against the floor repeatedly until silence returned. He asked her if she truly understood what she was proposing. The accord explicitly forbade unauthorized entry into human space. Lissa remained calm and explained that she was proposing authorized entry. They had lived in fear of the unknown for far too long. The humans had shown no aggression toward any Council species. They traded peacefully when approached at their embassy station. Their diplomatic staff were always cordial and helpful. Why should they continue to treat humans as a threat when all evidence suggested they were simply distant neighbors who valued their privacy? An elderly Threxian delegate rose slowly from his seat. His voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the events that shaped current policy. He spoke of how distant neighbors remained safe precisely because they stayed distant. The Krovar had learned the price of curiosity in the harshest way possible. Did the Council really need to repeat their mistakes? Must they lose thousands of ships and millions of lives before accepting that some boundaries existed for good reason? Lissa had expected this argument. She countered by pointing out that the Krovar had invaded with hostile intent and overwhelming force. She proposed something entirely different. A diplomatic mission consisting of a single small research vessel with no weapons, a crew of no more than 20 scientists and diplomats. A clear message of peaceful intent sent ahead of their arrival. If the humans refused contact, they would respect that decision and withdraw immediately. But if the humans accepted, the galaxy might finally understand the species that had shaped their policies and fears for nearly a millennium. The debate continued for hours. Arguments were made for and against the proposal. Some species supported Lissa's position, arguing that ignorance was more dangerous than knowledge. Others insisted that the current arrangement had kept the peace for 900 cycles and should not be disturbed. Finally, a vote was called. By the narrowest of margins, Lissa received permission to make the attempt. The conditions were strict and non-negotiable. 1 ship only, no weapons of any kind, maximum crew of 20. At the first sign of human displeasure, immediate withdrawal without argument or delay. 3 months later, the Pelleran research vessel Inquiry approached the human embassy station at the edge of their territory. Lissa stood on the bridge watching the station grow larger on the view screen. She had expected something impressive, perhaps even intimidating. Instead, the station was surprisingly modest. a simple rotating wheel design that could have been built by any spacefaring civilization. There was nothing about its appearance that suggested the advanced capabilities attributed to humanity. A human voice responded to their hail almost immediately. The voice was pleasant, with musical qualities that the translator rendered clearly. It identified itself as Embassy Station 7 and asked them to state their purpose. Lisa noted that the voice pattern indicated a female speaker, suggesting that humans had gender, distinctions similar to many other species. Lisa introduced herself and explained that she wished to discuss formal diplomatic relations and possible cultural exchange between their peoples. There was a pause that lasted longer than simple communication delay would account for. She imagined conversations happening on the human side, debates about how to respond to this unprecedented request. When the voice returned, it invited them to dock at Port 3 and promised that someone would meet them shortly. The docking procedure was smooth and followed standard protocols. When the airlock finally opened, Lisa got her first close look at a human being. The woman who stood waiting was young by most species standards. She had dark skin and darker eyes that seemed to absorb and analyze everything they looked at. She wore a simple blue uniform with no visible weapons or rank insignia beyond a name badge that identified her as Lieutenant Kate Morrison, Diplomatic Services. Kate extended her hand in what the cultural database identified as a human greeting gesture. Lisa carefully mimicked the motion, surprised by the warmth of human skin and the gentleness of Kate's grip. Kate welcomed them to the station and apologized for the informal reception. She explained that they did not receive many requests for direct contact, which Lisa found to be a masterful understatement, given that no one had ever made such a request before. Lisa acknowledged that her species and others tended to give human space a wide berth. Kate's expression shifted into something the database identified as a smile, though whether it indicated genuine amusement or polite acknowledgement remained unclear. She invited them to follow her to a conference room where they could talk more comfortably. The interior of the station was remarkably unremarkable. Clean corridors with functional lighting and simple directional signs. Nothing suggested technology beyond what any advanced species might employ. Lisa had expected something more, some hint of the capabilities that had destroyed the Krovar fleet. Instead, everything looked almost disappointingly normal. As they walked, Lisa decided to ask the question directly. She asked Kate why their charts ended at human space. Why did the entire galaxy fear crossing their borders? Kate stopped walking and turned to face her. For just a moment, Lisa saw something ancient and knowing in those young eyes, something that made her question whether appearances meant anything at all when it came to humans. Kate gave her a simple answer first. Because we asked them to. That was the straightforward truth. But Lisa pressed for the complex answer, the real reason behind the request. Kate resumed walking and began to explain something about humanity that would change how Lisa understood everything. Humans were not a warlike species by nature, Kate said. They had not expanded into the galaxy seeking conquest or domination. They came to the stars carrying the lessons learned from their own bloody history. They carried the scars of mistakes made and paid for in blood. When the Krovar came to Eden Prime, humanity faced a choice. They could respond with the full extent of their capabilities and remove the threat permanently. Or they could respond with proportional force and hope the demonstration would be sufficient. They chose restraint. They disabled the Krovar fleet without casualties. They sent the warriors home with a warning. They believed that would be enough. When the Krovar returned with their full armada of 2,000 ships, humanity realized their mistake. Some species interpreted restraint as weakness. Some cultures only understood absolute demonstrations of power. So humanity showed the Krovar what happened when humans stopped being restrained. Lisa felt a chill run through her body as she asked what had actually happened to that fleet. Kate's answer was delivered calmly, as if discussing something mundane rather than the fate of thousands of warships and millions of warriors. They were still alive, she explained. All of them. Living quite comfortably on a series of garden worlds that humanity had prepared for exactly such an eventuality. They could not leave because they lacked the technology to breach the barriers in place, but they were safe, healthy, and free to build whatever society they chose within their new home. Lisa's translator must have malfunctioned. She asked for clarification. Kate confirmed that yes, humanity had imprisoned an entire invasion force, though she corrected the terminology. They had not imprisoned anyone. They had given them a new start, away from the military culture that had sent them to die in a pointless war. The Krovar warriors and their descendants were growing up in peace, free from the imperial propaganda that had demanded constant expansion. In a few more generations, they might be ready to rejoin the galaxy as something other than conquerors. This was why the charts ended at human space, Kate explained. Not because humanity was hiding superweapons or dimensional gateways or megastructures, but because they had learned long ago that some problems could not be solved with force alone. They required patience, foresight, and the willingness to make difficult choices that others might call cruel or unusual. Humanity maintained their boundaries because they were not ready to share what they had learned with a galaxy that still thought in terms of dominance and submission. Not because humans saw themselves as superior, but because they remembered what it had cost them to move beyond those patterns. Kate led Lysa into a comfortable conference room with a view of open space. They sat, and Kate continued her explanation. Earth had fought dozens of world wars before achieving unity. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself more times than could be easily counted. They learned through terrible suffering that the only path forward required fundamentally changing how they approached conflict, resources, and each other. That transformation took centuries and cost billions of lives. Humanity was willing to share their knowledge, their technology, even their culture, but only with species that had proven themselves ready for it. The Council still operated on principles of mutual deterrence and carefully balanced power. They were not ready for what humanity could show them. When Lysa asked when they would be ready, Kate's smile was sad but kind. When you stop asking what weapons we possess and start asking how we built a civilization that does not need them. When you stop maintaining borders through threat of force and start maintaining them through mutual respect. When you stop seeing other species as potential enemies or resources and start seeing them as neighbors sharing a finite cosmos. That day was coming, Kate assured her. Lysa's presence suggested that humanity's patience might finally bear fruit, but it had not arrived yet. They talked for 6 more hours. Kate answered every question with patience and honesty. She never revealed specific technical capabilities but shared philosophy, history, and perspective. By the end, Lysa understood both more and less than when she had arrived. As the inquiry prepared to depart, Kate gave Lysa a small data crystal. It contained human literature, philosophy, and history. Lysa could share it with the Council or keep it private as she saw fit. Consider it a small step toward the day when our charts might finally overlap, Kate said. Lysa returned to the Council with a report that satisfied no one and disturbed everyone. The humans were not hostile, but neither were they allies. They existed in a category the galaxy had no framework for understanding, powerful enough to conquer, wise enough not to, and patient enough to wait until others reached their level. The chart still ended at human space, but now at least some understood that the border was not a wall but a threshold, waiting for the galaxy to become ready to cross it. The plague arrived without warning and spread through Nexarian space like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. It attacked their unique biology with terrifying precision, targeting the neural clusters that governed their collective consciousness. Within weeks, millions were dead. Within months, their entire civilization stood on the edge of complete extinction. The Nexarians watched helplessly as their people died faster than they could count the losses. The Nexarians were an ancient species, peaceful scholars who had contributed immeasurably to galactic science over 15,000 cycles. Their vast libraries contained knowledge gathered across eons, insights into physics and biology that had advanced every council species. Now those libraries fell silent as the keepers died before they could train replacements. The accumulated wisdom of millennia faced oblivion alongside the species that had gathered it. High Scholar Ven stood before the Galactic Council, her body already showing visible signs of the plague. Tremors had begun in her outer appendages that morning. According to the best medical projections, she had perhaps 3 weeks left to live. Her voice carried the harmonics of despair as she addressed the assembled representatives. They had exhausted every option available to them. Their best medical researchers were already dead or dying. The Threxian antiviral treatments produced no effect whatsoever. The Palaran genetic therapies merely slowed the progression slightly. Current projections indicated total species extinction within 4 cycles. Chancellor Vorn's voice was heavy with genuine sorrow as he responded. The Council had dedicated every available resource to finding a cure. Their finest medical minds from dozens of species were working around the clock in combined research facilities. Every breakthrough in xenobiology was being applied to the problem. But the plague defied all their efforts. It seemed to adapt to every treatment they developed, almost as if it had been designed specifically to resist their medical technology. Ven's chromatic surfaces shifted to colors indicating both determination and fear. She knew the Council had done everything possible within their capabilities. She was grateful beyond words for their efforts. But there remained one more option they had not pursued. One possibility that everyone had been too afraid to suggest. They must ask the humans for help. The chamber fell into absolute silence. It was one thing to send a curious diplomat on a peaceful mission to satisfy academic interest. It was another thing entirely to approach the mysterious humans as supplicants begging for intervention. To admit weakness and dependency to beings whose capabilities remained fundamentally unknown. To reveal that despite all their combined knowledge and technology, the Council species were powerless against this threat. An elder Threxian spoke carefully, his words chosen to avoid giving offense while stating uncomfortable truth. The humans had never responded to any crisis beyond their borders. They maintained strict non-interference in galactic affairs. They had watched countless disasters unfold across Council space without offering assistance. What made the Nexarians believe humanity would break their long-standing policy now? Ven's body language conveyed absolute certainty, despite her deteriorating physical condition. They had never asked properly before. The galaxy had treated humans as a mystery to be feared, as powerful strangers to avoid rather than neighbors to trust. Perhaps it was time they learned whether human power was matched by human compassion. Perhaps it was time to treat them not as unknowable others but as fellow sentient beings who might care about preventing genocide. The debate that followed was heated and emotional. Some argued that approaching humans showed dangerous weakness. Others insisted that pride should not prevent them from pursuing any option that might save an entire species. Some feared what price humanity might demand in exchange for their help. Others pointed out that allowing the Nexarians to die when help might exist was morally indefensible. Finally, after hours of argument, the Council authorized Ven's mission. Ambassador Lisa volunteered to accompany her, bringing whatever goodwill her previous contact with humanity had established. The journey to Embassy Station 7 took 3 days. Ven's condition worsened visibly with each passing hour. By the time they docked, she could barely maintain her physical form's cohesion. Her neural clusters were failing rapidly, causing her body to lose the structural integrity that Nexarian biology required. She was dying, and everyone knew it. Kate Morrison met them at the airlock. Her expression was difficult for non-humans to read, but her body language suggested concern. She greeted them both by name and added quietly that she knew why they had come. The word suggested that humanity had been monitoring the situation, watching the plague spread, observing the Council's failed attempts to stop it. Lissa helped support Ven's weight as they moved through the station. She spoke bluntly because time was running out. The Nexarians would cease to exist as a species within months. If humanity possessed medical technology that could help, they were begging for it to be shared. Pride no longer mattered. Politics no longer mattered. Only survival remained. Kate was quiet for a long moment, studying Ven with eyes that showed genuine concern. She finally asked them to follow her, but warned that the decision was not hers to make. Even if her superiors agreed to help, what humanity might offer could fundamentally change the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities. Once certain knowledge became public, there would be no way to undo that revelation. She led them to a medical bay that was far more advanced than anything visible in the station's public areas. Ven was placed gently on a diagnostic platform that immediately began scanning her with technologies Lisa could not identify. The readings appeared on displays using symbols and concepts that had no equivalence in Council science. A new human entered the medical bay. He was older than Kate, with gray streaking through his dark hair. His name badge identified him as Dr. Chris Bennett, Medical Sciences. He greeted Ven with what seemed like genuine sympathy, expressing regret that they were meeting under such terrible circumstances. While speaking, he studied the diagnostic readouts with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. Chris stated something that shocked both visitors. He had been analyzing the plague data that Nexarian researchers had transmitted to the Council databases. The disease was elegant in its cruelty, he said. Whoever designed it knew Nixarian biology with intimate precision. Every aspect of how it attacked their neural clusters showed sophisticated understanding of their unique physiology. Ven's harmonics stuttered in shock at the word designed. Chris confirmed what he had said. This was not a natural pathogen. Someone had created it specifically to target the Nixarian species. The only question was who had done this and why they wanted the Nixarians dead. Chris looked at Kate and some silent communication passed between them. Kate gave a slight nod. Chris turned back to Ven and spoke with directness that was almost brutal in its honesty. They could cure this plague. They could have a treatment synthesized within hours and a vaccine ready for mass distribution within 1 week. But there was a significant complication that had to be addressed. Ven spoke desperately, her voice weakening as her condition worsened. She would pay any price. The Nixarians would give their entire knowledge base, their technology, their territory, anything and everything to save their people from extinction. Name the cost and it would be paid without hesitation or complaint. Chris shook his head. They did not want payment. Humanity had no interest in claiming Nixarian resources or territory. The complication was something different and far more serious. Curing this plague would reveal capabilities that humans had kept hidden for 900 cycles. Once the galaxy knew what humanity could actually do, there would be no going back to the comfortable ignorance that had maintained peace for so long. Lissa stepped forward and asked directly what capabilities he was talking about. Chris gestured to the diagnostic display showing the plague's activity at microscopic levels. The disease operated at the quantum biological level. It manipulated probability fields within neural tissue to cause cascading failures. Countering it required technology that could operate at the same level. Demonstrating such technology would prove that humanity had mastered quantum manipulation in ways that made conventional weapons and defenses completely obsolete, right? Now the galaxy feared humans because of what happened to the Krovar fleet. That fear was based on one incident and mostly speculation. If humanity cured this plague, everyone would know that humans could manipulate matter and energy at scales that made them effectively omnipotent by current galactic standards. The careful balance of mystery and distance that had prevented conflict for 9 centuries would be destroyed. Kate added quietly that they had spent 900 cycles maintaining the illusion that human power was limited to military applications. The truth was far more profound. Humanity had rebuilt their entire civilization on principles of quantum engineering. They could cure any disease, repair any injury, even reverse the aging process. They had eliminated scarcity, suffering, and death from human experience. Post-scarcity civilization was not just theory for them but lived reality. They had not shared this knowledge because history taught them that societies, built on scarcity and competition, could not integrate post-scarcity thinking without collapsing. The psychological adjustment alone took generations. Species that received advanced technology before developing the cultural framework to use it responsibly destroyed themselves. Humanity had learned that lesson by watching it happen repeatedly. Ven's voice was barely audible now. She asked if humans could have prevented countless deaths across the galaxy, all the plagues, all the famines, all the natural disasters that had killed trillions over the centuries. Chris's expression showed genuine pain as he confirmed that yes, they could have prevented most of it. That knowledge would destroy the galactic community, he explained. Species would tear themselves apart demanding access to human technology. Wars would erupt over who received immortality first. The Council would fracture into factions trying to steal what they could not earn through their own development. So humanity had made the hardest choice possible. They stayed behind their borders, appearing powerful but limited, hoping the galaxy would eventually evolve to a point where sharing was possible without causing the suffering they were trying to prevent. Lissa felt anger rising through her shock. Humans had let people die to preserve their secrets. Kate corrected her firmly but without hostility. They let people die to preserve their societies. Every species in the Council was following their own evolutionary path toward post-scarcity civilization. Interfering in that process did not accelerate development, but disrupted it fatally. But they had never faced a situation quite like this before. A deliberate plague designed to commit genocide against a peaceful species. If they stood by and allowed the Nixarians to die when they could prevent it, they became complicit in murder. If they intervened, they risked destabilizing the entire galaxy. Chris turned to Ven and gave her the choice. They could cure her people, but the galaxy would learn what humanity truly was. The comfortable ignorance would end. Was she prepared for what came after? Ven's chromatic surfaces cycled through colors that Lissa had never seen, emotions beyond normal range. Finally, they settled on deep blue, indicating absolute certainty. "Save my people," she said. "Whatever comes after, we will face together." The galaxy needed to stop living in ignorance, even if truth was terrifying. Chris nodded and began entering commands into systems that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. He told Kate to send word to Earth. They were proceeding with Project Phoenix. It was time the galaxy learned what humanity really represented. Within hours, Ven's condition stabilized. Within days, every Nexarian received treatment. Within weeks, the plague was completely eradicated, and the galaxy would never be the same. The footage spread across every council world within hours of its release. High Scholar Ven, who had been dying just days before, now stood healthy and whole before the assembled representatives. The tremors were gone. Her chromatic surfaces displayed vibrant colors that had been absent during her illness. Beside her stood Dr. Chris Bennett and Lieutenant Kate Morrison, representing a species that had just rewritten everything the galaxy thought it knew about the limits of what was possible. Ven spoke with harmonics that conveyed both joy and deep concern. Her people were grateful beyond measure for humanity's intervention. Every Nexarian who had been infected was now cured. Their species had been pulled back from the edge of extinction. But gratitude alone was not enough. The galaxy now had to face uncomfortable truths about their cosmic neighbors and about themselves. What they had believed about humanity was wrong. What they were about to learn would be far more disturbing than anything they had imagined. The presentation that followed shattered 900 cycles of comfortable assumptions. Humans demonstrated technologies that seemed impossible according to known physics. They showed medical facilities that could cure any illness, repair any injury, and extend life indefinitely. They revealed agricultural systems that produced unlimited food, with zero environmental impact. They displayed power generation that drew energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations, providing limitless clean energy forever. Each demonstration was more unsettling than the last, not because the technology was threatening, but because it redefined what civilization could achieve. But what disturbed the Council most was the timeline. Humanity had possessed these capabilities for over 400 cycles. 4 centuries during which the galaxy had suffered plagues that killed billions. 4 centuries of famines that devastated entire worlds. 4 centuries of resource wars that could have been prevented with technology. Humans had been hiding behind their borders. The implications were staggering and deeply troubling. The Corthan representative was the first to voice what many were thinking. He slammed multiple appendages against his podium with enough force to crack the surface. "They had watched the galaxy die," he shouted. "They possessed the means to end suffering across known space and chose to hoard their gifts like dragons hoarding treasure. How many lives could have been saved if humans had simply shared what they knew? How many civilizations could have been preserved? How many children could have grown to adulthood instead of dying from preventable causes?" Chancellor Vorn struggled to maintain order as accusations flew from every direction. Representatives demanded explanations. Some called for sanctions against humanity despite knowing such measures would be meaningless. Others demanded immediate access to human technology as reparations for centuries of withheld aid. The chamber descended into chaos that took nearly an hour to bring back under control. Kate Morrison finally stepped forward. Her young face remained calm despite the hostility directed at her from all sides. She stood at the center of the chamber and waited for silence. When it came, she acknowledged their anger directly. "They were right to be angry," she said. Humanity had expected this reaction. They had prepared for it. But before the council judged them too harshly, she asked them to understand some critical context about human history and why the decision to remain isolated had been made. A holographic display activated behind her, showing images from Earth's past. Kate narrated over scenes of war, destruction, nuclear fire, and slow rebuilding across centuries. 4,000 cycles ago, she explained, humanity discovered nuclear fission. Within 1 century, they nearly destroyed themselves with it. 3,000 cycles ago, they developed genetic engineering. They used it to create biological weapons that killed billions of their own people. 2,500 cycles ago, they achieved artificial intelligence. The resulting war between humans and their own creations left Earth barely habitable for generations. Each time humanity gained transformative technology, they weaponized it before understanding it. Each time they paid a terrible price in death and suffering. Each advancement that should have improved life instead became a new method of destruction. Slowly and painfully, they learned that technological advancement without corresponding ethical evolution led only to more sophisticated forms of self-destruction. The display shifted to show humanity's first contact with alien life, occurring 1,500 cycles before the present day. Kate described the Zelnar Commonwealth, a kind and peaceful species that humans encountered during their early expansion into the stars. The Zelnar were dying from a genetic disorder that human medical technology could easily cure. Humanity saw suffering they could prevent and chose to help without hesitation. They cured the disorder and shared their medical technology freely, believing they were being compassionate and generous. Within 2 generations, the Zelnar Commonwealth collapsed into brutal civil war. Factions fought savage battles over access to immortality treatments. Their entire society had been built on the acceptance of death as a natural transition between generations. They had philosophy, religion, and social structures all based on the certainty of mortality. When humanity removed that certainty, everything collapsed. Billions died in conflicts that human intervention had directly caused. The Zelnar never recovered. Their civilization fragmented into dozens of smaller groups that spent centuries fighting each other. Kate's voice grew heavy with old pain as she continued. Humanity repeated that mistake 7 more times with 7 different species. Each time they believed they had learned their lesson. Each time they refined their approach to sharing technology. Each time they caused catastrophic cultural disruption that led to suffering far worse than what they had tried to prevent. Species that had been thriving before human contact descended into chaos, violence, and sometimes extinction after receiving technology they were not prepared to integrate. Finally, humanity understood the fundamental problem. It was not their methods of sharing that were flawed. It was the assumption that they should share at all. Advanced technology given to unprepared societies did not liberate them, but destroyed them. Not because the technology itself was dangerous, but because the psychological and social frameworks needed to use it responsibly took time to develop naturally. There were no shortcuts. You could not skip the hard lessons that taught a species to value collective well-being over individual gain, to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profit, to see all sentient life as equally worthy of dignity and respect. Chris Bennett took over the presentation at this point. He explained that humanity had studied the civilizations they had inadvertently harmed. They analyzed the patterns of collapse and recovery. They discovered that societies moved through predictable stages of development, each stage built on lessons learned in previous stages. Trying to skip stages did not accelerate development, but prevented it entirely. A species had to learn certain truths through their own experience before they could integrate technologies built on those truths. These lessons were learned through struggle, failure, and hard-won wisdom. Every species had to walk that evolutionary path themselves. Humanity could guide and inspire, but they could not do the work for others. Giving a primitive species fusion power did not make them advanced. It just gave them a bigger bomb to destroy themselves with. Giving an unprepared species immortality did not make them wise. It just gave them forever to make the same mistakes. Ambassador Lissa found herself standing without consciously deciding to do so. Her voice carried across the silent chamber. The Nexarian plague was different from the examples Kate had described. That was deliberate genocide, not a natural challenge for the species to overcome. Kate acknowledged this immediately. Yes, which was exactly why humanity had intervened. They had strict rules for their non-interference policy. They did not prevent natural disasters or evolutionary challenges. Those were necessary for species development. But they did stop deliberate acts of genocide or extinction-level threats from outside sources. The plague had crossed that line clearly. Ven asked the question that had haunted her since Chris's initial diagnosis. Who had created the plague? Who had tried to exterminate her entire species? Chris's expression hardened as he answered. They were still investigating, but had strong evidence pointing to a radical faction within the Threxian military. The group had viewed the Nexarians' growing influence on Council science policy as a threat to Threxian power and prestige. Rather than compete intellectually, they had chosen to eliminate the competition entirely. The Threxian delegation erupted in denial and outrage. Representatives shouted that this was impossible, that their species would never commit such atrocities. Chancellor Vorn called for order and promised a full investigation with complete transparency. The chamber dissolved into arguing factions as species chose sides. Kate continued speaking over the chaos. This was precisely why humanity maintained their boundaries. The galaxy still operated on power dynamics that enabled genocide as a political tool. Council species were not ready for the technologies humanity possessed, because they had not yet built the ethical frameworks needed to use them responsibly. War and competition were still seen as acceptable methods of resolving disputes. Power and dominance still governed relationships between species. But, she added with emphasis, the galaxy was closer than it had ever been. The fact that the Council had immediately devoted resources to saving the Nexarians showed real evolution. 1,000 cycles ago, species would have watched them die, and then divided up their territory among the survivors. Now they tried to save each other. That represented genuine progress toward the kind of civilization that could handle post-scarcity technology. An elderly Pelleran philosopher rose slowly, her voice thoughtful rather than accusatory. What Kate was describing sounded like a form of guardianship. Humanity had positioned itself as the galaxy's protector and guide, deciding what others could and could not know. Chris corrected her carefully. Not protectors, he said. More like older siblings who had already learned painful lessons and were trying to help younger siblings avoid the same mistakes. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They did not enforce their values on others through threat or coercion. They simply maintained space where they could develop their own path, while allowing the rest of the galaxy to develop along their own paths. When the galaxy reached a point where species stopped thinking in terms of power and dominance, where cooperation became the default rather than the exception, where the well-being of all was valued over the advantage of some, then human technologies would spread naturally, not through humanity sharing them but through other species developing them independently, guided by the ethical evolution needed to use them wisely and well. Lysa spoke again, her frustration evident in her voice. How long must they wait? How many must die from preventable causes while humanity watched from behind their borders? Kate's answer was simple and devastating. Until you stop asking that question. The very fact that you frame it as, how long must we wait rather than what work must we do shows the gap in thinking. You want us to give you solutions. We need you to earn the wisdom that makes solutions meaningful. Humanity would continue to intervene in cases of genocide or extinction-level threats. They would continue to trade, share knowledge at levels other species could integrate safely, and maintain diplomatic relations. But they would not give the galaxy post-scarcity technology until it proved capable of handling it. Development could not be rushed without causing the very suffering everyone claimed they wanted to prevent. The session ended without resolution. The Council split into factions. Some demanded immediate technology access. Some called for complete isolation from human influence. Some, like Lysa and Ven, began the difficult work of understanding what changes their societies needed to make. The charts no longer ended at human space. Now they included detailed maps of human territory. But they also included new markers showing the ethical distance between human civilization and everyone else. The borders remained not because humans enforced them with weapons, but because the galaxy was finally beginning to understand why they existed in the first place.